I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld. We're Ireland's top podcast for 2025, and now we've got a new website. So if you want to learn more about crime and criminals, if you want stories, extras, and podcast subscriber specials, go to www.crimeworld.com.
So there's nothing wrong with yoga, of course, Alison, but I suppose it wouldn't be the thing that you'd automatically associate with a UVF terrorist, I suppose we can call him at this stage.
Yeah, he is. The UVF gunrunner, Winston Winkie Irvine, we're told, has now dedicated himself to perfecting his downward-facing dog while in prison and is meditating in his cell to try and cope with the fact that he's had his prison term almost doubled by the Court of Appeal.
And of course, like the prison system, I presume, pay for this, and and of course, wellness. Who's against people getting well and being happy? I suppose even in prison. But the reason we're talking about Winky, I suppose, and even the fact he's doing yoga is of interest, is because of this complex situation he had, where he was both an agent for the UVF and in part an agent for peace, and in part almost an agent for the Irish and British governments.
Yeah, the Irish government loved Winky. They took him by the hand. They paid for him to do his degree at Maynooth University. He was constantly in the company of senior members of the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs. He was often at events that would have been hosted as well by the Northern Ireland office. And he was said to be, the main loyalist they went to in terms of peacekeeping and any sort of community issues. And that was shown at his trial, because the reason why he got such a light sentence to start off with was because he showed up with a folder full of references from the great and the good, saying that, he was practically Gandhi by the end of it. Maybe that's where all the namaste is coming from now.
Maybe so.
Yeah. So he was painted in a way that the judge accepted that there was exception. He was an exceptional person and there was exceptional circumstances. He was caught with quite a lot of guns. So the background to this is that Winston Irvine and his co-accused, a guy called Robin Workman, were both charged in relation to gun offences. Workman's van was spotted by police on the Shankill. This dates away back to June 2022. And they saw him then something was put into the back of Winston Irvine's car. The cops then stopped, pull Winston Irvine in Disraeli Street in the Shankill. We got, the police had body-worn camera footage, which was very heavily redacted, by the way, that they gave to the media, which showed the search. At the start, he said he didn't know what was in the boot of his car. He then gave a pre-prepared statement saying that he was involved in peace and often would take ownership of items to, pass them on to the authorities. Tried to make out this was some sort of decommissioning effort. The authorities dismissed that. There was a pre-hearing where a senior police officer rubbished that and said he'd never had any discussions of that kind with him, nor was anything like that planned. And then in December 2024, on a very quiet day in the court where none of us were expecting it, both entered guilty pleas to the offences. It would then take another while before they were sentenced. And Robin Workman got the minimum term for these offences, which was 5 years, to serve half in prison and half on licence. But Winston Irvine got half of that again. So take the minimum term for having possession of weapons. He had military-grade magazines for machine guns, over 200 rounds of ammunition. He was given, the minimum term was 5 years. He was given half the minimum term, with half of that again to be served in prison and half on licence. So a very minimal jail term. There was an outcry in relation to this, as you can imagine.
Yeah, and the reason there was an outcry is because, clearly people felt that he was having a foot in both camps, he was, being disingenuous, to say the least. Because of course you talk about him having contacts with the Irish state, but I think it was in the middle of this, was it, that there was a bomb threat, for example, against Simon Coveney, and who, obviously Winston Irvine is meeting these people from the Irish government, but the branch of the UVF that he will be associated with was the prime suspects for sending in that bomb threat, and it was a very serious bomb threat as well.
Yeah, the PSNI said at the time that the B company of the Shankill UVF were responsible for this, of which Winston Irvine was commander at that time. He'd have been on bail at that time. And what happened was I don't know, it was a plumber, an electrician, a guy in a van was hijacked on the Shankill. This very convincing looking, very large bomb was placed in the back of his car. Now, it turns out it was a hoax bomb. But if you're the guy driving the van, you didn't know that. You thought there was a ticking time bomb in the back of your van. He was told to drive it to the Hopen Centre, that they knew who his family was, and if he didn't take it there, there'd be repercussions. He drove it in, got out of the van, literally fell to the floor in his hands and knees in panic. There's footage you can see of Simon Coveney's personal protection officer walking over and whispering in his ear, basically, we got to get the hell out of here. He was then scooped out. The whole road was closed off. They declared it an elaborate hoax at the end. But this was all to do with the Brexit negotiations at that time. Loyalists were very much against what was being negotiated in terms of the Windsor Framework. And clearly this was intended to put pressure on the EU and the Irish government to sort of bow down to what they were demanding. The police were very clear as to where that came from. And that was maybe the beginning of the unravelling of Winky the Peacemaker, in terms of that. But there are some people still very late to the table. I mean, I've heard some people say that they still have hopes for him when he gets out of prison. And this baffles me, because if this was a Republican who had pretended to be part of the peace process while he was carrying guns in the past, there would be no way back. There's no retribution from that. And yet we know that he is on the loyalist wing, albeit the UVF say they've sidelined him, not completely expelled him, but he is on the separated loyalist wing of McGabry, where there are only 8 prisoners, loyalist prisoners. He has no rank, as you like. They give themselves ranks within. There is a UVF man, a guy called Stephen Revels, who actually was convicted of the murder of 2 teenagers. 2 innocent teenagers had their throats cut. So he's a nice guy. He's in charge of that landing. And Winston's there, and then he's not mixing with the other prisoners. He sees himself as a cut above them. He's educated. He's got degrees. These people are thugs compared to me. And instead, I've been told by prison sources that every time you look into his cell, he is standing on one leg, practicing his yoga poses on the yoga mat and meditating and reading. And that is how he is passing his time while he is in prison, which is very, I suppose, on brand for Winston Irvine, who likes to give the appearance of someone he is. And well, he isn't, while by doing other things in the background. It always struck me that those references that he showed up with, they were treated as mitigation, and that he had in some way deserved a lesser sentence. But to me, they were always more a sort of aggravating factor, because if you were so convincingly pretending to people who trusted you with huge sums of public money, including police officers who would have met with him regularly, and you were convincing them that you were Winston the Peacemaker while you were actually Winky the UVF gunrunner in the background, surely the deception was an aggravating factor, not a mitigating factor.
You would think so. I mean, it's a cynical use, really, of the peace process and the operation of the state in order to, keep a foot in both camps. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And of course, on it, when the sentence was appealed, the judge did at that point view it in those terms.
Yeah, so the appeal court judges did say that the sentence was too lenient. They ruled it was too lenient, and they increased it to be the same as what Workman had got. So it's still, it's still the minimum term for those offences. It's just that he will now serve 2.5 years inside in prison and 2.5 years outside of prison. And for someone who he lived in a very nice house. He had acquired a great deal of outward shows of having benefited from the peace process. He would have been winded down and courted among the great and the good, often in out of government buildings. And he is now also clearly in a government building, albeit,
the wrong type of government building, I suppose. Yeah. And so, his excommunication from the UVF is not total, I suppose. I mean, is there... The UVF are they still a coherent organisation? We've seen a lot of splits. We've reported on some of them on this. Is there are they a unified organisation, or is it just all of these wings doing their own thing?
Yeah. Well, the UVF, unlike the UDA, is more or less unified under one leadership, and that's quite an aging leadership. They're quite an elderly leadership that have been in place probably in the early 80s. It is, apart from a faction of the East Belfast UVF, who still remain under that umbrella, albeit there's been questions asked in relation to them. They do still operate under the one leadership. because that leadership is aging and is moving on a bit, and they had been working with the governments in terms of transition from a military group to an old boy sort of remembrance group, that's all been put on hold. I don't think that's going to happen anytime in the next couple of years. But Winky had his eye on that leadership. There's people who were clearly going to have to move on, either through they were going to die off or they were just going to get too old and step down. And he clearly had his eye on that prize. I'm not sure that's obtainable now, but he will return. He will get out of prison. He will return to his house where he lives in Ballysillan. He'll be able to return there. He will no doubt be seen up and down, making a point of being seen on the Shankill to show that he hasn't been in any way threatened. But a lot of the people who he would have associated with, who for a long time had suspicions about him and about his motives, clearly think that they have been vindicated by what has happened. And they've also found out since that the promises that he was making to the British and Irish government about what he could deliver on behalf of the UVF were utter nonsense, and he had never passed any of this with the leadership. He was literally just saying what they wanted to hear, knowing that would benefit him financially.
Well, maybe he could have a new career as a yoga instructor for retired UVF soldiers when he gets out. Who knows?
He could, and there are some days I think I need a bit of yoga in my life, a bit of meditation. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I do, Alison.
There's a lot of stress going on here, and I wondered maybe should I channel a bit of that and get a bit namaste myself?
Give it a go. I mean, I don't. My only concern is if I went into the downward dog, I might not get back out. Well, so we won't record that on YouTube if I do try it, Alison. Okay. Thanks very much, Alison, and we'll come back to Winky, no doubt, again and again.
No bother.